Hello, everyone. This is Afrometrics research-based news, just giving you an update on the major research publications of this past week that are relevant to the Black world. So what's new in the world of research on Black populations in the past 7 days? So this past week, there was a new study published called Racial Battle Fatigue, the experiences of Black African-American, biracial Black, and multiracial Black identified graduate students. And this study was published in the Journal of Black Psychology. The authors of this study were Catherine Ragland Woods, Krista Chronister, Alexandria Perez Grabeau, William Woods, and Kendall Woodley. Okay, so why is a study like this important? As the researchers explained, the Black students attending institutions of higher education experience racism and race-related stress, along with messages that they don't belong, that they are lazy, that they're criminals, that they're less intelligent than their non-Black peers, and that they were admitted because of their race. And as a result, they can feel like tokens. They can feel demoralized. They can feel excluded. They may have lower self-esteem and feel like an imposter. So the authors of this study investigated Black counseling and clinical graduate students' experiences of psychological, physiological, and behavioral racial battle fatigue across their different roles as students in class, as advisees, and as supervisees, and their differences in racial battle fatigue experiences by gender and race. This term, racial battle fatigue, what does it mean? It refers to the psychological, the physiological, the behavioral effects associated with racial and ethnic minorities' experiences fighting racism and the consequences, the toll that plays on their bodies and their minds. So they use questionnaires to examine the relationship between racial battle fatigue experiences and graduate students' roles among 57 Black, mixed race Black, and biracial Black graduate students. And again, they examine the students' experiences in their different roles as students in class, advisees, and as supervisees. What they discovered was that Black graduate students reported experiencing racial battle fatigue across all of their different roles, with male students reporting more behavioral stress as students in class and as advisees compared to Black graduate student women. But what explains these results? The author suggests that Black women students may reduce racial battle fatigue by utilizing coping strategies in response to racial microaggressions and experiences with racism better than their Black male colleagues. And because of this, the intersectionality between race and gender in relationship to racial battle fatigue, as well as other factors and variables such as their coping techniques, are things that should be further explored and further investigated in future studies. But how can this information be used to improve Black students' lives? In the words of the authors of this study, the results of their research can help to inform program efforts to create more inclusive and supportive learning and training spaces for Black graduate students. The authors also expressed their hope that their findings can move counseling and clinical professionals and advisors and supervisors to critically reflect on the ways that they may actually perpetuate racist actions, consciously or unconsciously, and to take anti-racist action to reduce Black graduate students' racial battle fatigue and improve Black graduate students' learning and training experiences. A second study that was published in this past week is a new study published called Meaning in Life and Impact of COVID-19 Pandemic on African Immigrants in the United States. The study was published in the Journal of Wellbeing, Space, and Society, and it was authored by Angela Ekwonye, Belarim Ezuma, Ngozi Nwosisi. So these social scientists investigated the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic-related isolation and social distancing requirements on African immigrants in the United States. The authors of this study point out that social distancing may be even more devastating to African immigrants who rely on their social, their religious, and their spiritual communities to cope with and to make meaning of significant negative life situations and experiences. So African immigrants find solace in meaning, and they do it by actively engaging in their social, religious, and spiritual communities. And these activities have been interrupted to a significant degree by pandemic-related policies. So the authors were trying to answer several questions. One, what are the core sources of meaning for African immigrants? Two, how has the current COVID-19 crisis threatened African immigrants' meaning in life? And three, how have emergent technologies, including social media, networking conduits, impacted African immigrants' meaning-making process in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic? So meaning-making, let's talk about what that actually refers to. Meaning-making is how we assign significance to our life events, how we understand them, how we interpret them, and determine what they mean for us. So to answer these questions, they interviewed 20 adult African immigrants in the United States who had migrated from West Africa, East Africa, and Central Africa. And they found that the pandemic social distance policies had indeed impacted the sources of African immigrants, the sources that they drew on for meaning in life. More specifically, the pandemic impacted their relationships, their personal life goals, their religious faith, their stewardship, and their health and well-being. So some mentioned that being in relationships is a part of what gives meaning to their life, and their relationships were interrupted by the pandemic. For others, their faith communities is where they drew their life meaning from, and the social distancing policies threatened to interrupt that as well. For others, their personal life goals are where they get their sense of meaning and fulfillment, but the pandemic's impact on employment had undermined that as well. So ultimately, the global pandemic has significantly disrupted these sources of meaning, life satisfaction, and fulfillment. And lastly, the study found that technology had become essential during the period of social isolation and social distancing due to the COVID-19 pandemic. People have relied on technology and social media to learn to stay connected, to maintain social networks, to stay connected to their faith communities, and to complete their work. And based on this study, the authors suggest that healthcare professionals encourage their African immigrant patients to talk about their sources of meaning, since meaning has significance in how people integrate unexpected or negative events like the COVID-19 pandemic and to regain a sense of control in their lives. So knowing the sources of meaning of African immigrants can help healthcare practitioners to enhance their African immigrant patients' capacity to respond to opportunities and to manage the problems that arise in their lives and maintain their health, their well-being, their sense of confidence and fulfillment and joy in life. Third, this past week, the Center for Economic and Social Research at the University of Southern California released a new report on how Americans are dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, and the report breaks down several survey responses by racial and ethnic group. The results show that African Americans take social distancing far more seriously than white Americans. The following is a list of some of the highlights that demonstrate this point. One, 2/3 of white respondents said that they had close contact with people who they did not live with over the week prior to the survey. For Blacks, the figure was 45.8%. Number two, nearly 12% of whites reported that they had been to a club or a bar in the past week, compared to only 5% of Blacks. For whites, 41% had visited a friend's or neighbors or relative's house in the week prior to the survey. For Blacks, the figure was only 26%. More than 43% of whites had visitors inside of their house or residence during the 7 days prior to the survey, compared to only 29% of Blacks. Nearly 15% of whites had attended a gathering of 10 people or more, compared to 8% of Blacks. 40% of whites said that they had stayed in their home for the past 7 days, except for obtaining essential items. For Blacks, the same figure was 52%. Nearly 70% of whites said that they had gone outside for a walk or exercise. Only 45% of Blacks had done so. Nearly 10% of whites had gone to a religious service in person, compared to 4% of Blacks. But the point being that Black Americans had taken social distancing far more seriously than their white counterparts. Thank you, everybody. This has been an Afrometrics research-based news brief, and you can visit us at afrometrics.org, and I will see you all next week for new studies and new study results on Black populations across the African world.